Is this the best hardtail in the world? Or this one? Or this one? I'm setting out on a quest to find the best hardtail in the world, and over the next 8 weeks, I'll be testing 8 different frames using all of the same parts on every bike for consistency. It's gonna be a ton of work, but I'll stop at nothing to find the best hardtail in the world. First, a little backstory. In December 2022, I bought a hardtail to get back to my budget roots, but I quickly discovered the joy of riding a mountain bike with no rear suspension. Aside from being much cheaper and easier to work on, there's just something special about them. They're simplistic, they bring new challenges to riding trails, and you have to carefully choose your lines, and saying that you did a feature on the hardtail holds some weight. It wasn't long after I got back into riding hardtails that I realized that no rear suspension meant that every aspect of a hardtail matters. Things like tire choice, tire pressure, shock absorbent spokes, flexi bars, and most importantly, geometry and frame design. With the hardtail not fitting, your hardtail experience will be a nightmare. Pain, aches, crashes. And my first hardtail of the year was just that, causing massive pain in my ankle. Then I bought the Ragley Big, another budget hardtail and a pretty fun build. I upgraded it and even grabbed a huge KOM. KOM, no, KOM! But at the end of the day, it was just too small. So what was intended to be a fun video riding a cheap bike turned into a full-on journey to find the best hardtail in the world, a hardtail quest. So here's the rules. Only aluminum frames for season 1. All frames must be 29-inch and medium, designed to use a 140mm fork. And to make the test as consistent as possible, I'll be using the same parts on all the different frames. At the end, the winner will become my personal hardtail, and the rest, gotta go. So welcome to the full season of Hardtail Quest with some bonus commentary after each episode. And at the end, a head-to-head test with my 2 favorite frames. And I did not get lazy with this one. It's not just a complete dump of all the episodes into one big video, so some things will be cut, added, even reshot for your viewing pleasure. This will be a long video, so feel free to play it on your TV, pause, take a break, or just have it on the background. Let's get started. For the first test of season 1 of Hardtail Quest, we'll be testing the new and improved, fully redesigned Ragley Big, and they changed everything, but luckily kept the head tube badge. First up is a super drastic change, making this bike maybe even considered to be a hardcore hardtail now. The head tube angle is now 63.5. That's slacker than my common salt Enduro. The fork is still supposed to be 140mm travel, but now the stack height is drastically taller than the last generation. And that was my biggest problem with the older Ragley. I've been feeling like the front end was just not present at all. And that means like the bars felt super low, the front end felt like kind of sucked in like way closer to me, and I couldn't do anything about it. So we'll see how this one goes. Another big change is the reach is now 15mm longer. So that'll make the stem and the bars feel way further out from my center point. Well, on paper that is. So can you believe I've had my black Ragley for 5 months now and I never installed a dropper post? But now it's time. The only problem was I didn't want to buy another dropper post because it's like 31.6. So I got a shim and that will go in there. But that brings me to the next major change on this bike. The C-tube angle went from 72 and is now 75, meaning that while I'm pedaling, I'm gonna be in a much more forward position, and I think a lot more comfortable, especially on the steep climbs. So another major change is the wheelbase. The wheelbase is now 26mm longer. I mean, that's expected, right? The fork is all choppered out now, so that makes the front wheel way further out. But with all that, they truly made this Big Al into a true hardcore hardtail. Man, that frame swap was so easy. I love external cable routing. But with that, what do you guys think of the blue? Man, I just love the look of this. I actually asked Ragley for the white version, but I'm actually kind of glad they sent me the blue. But that brings me to the ranking system, with the first category being the looks. How does the frame look? The welds, the shape of the tubing, just overall feel, the build quality. So with this Ragley in the look category, it's definitely better than the last generation Ragley. So I'll give it a 4 out of 5. The front triangle is bigger. I really like the paint job. The welds are pretty good, and I'll give that a 3 out of 5 because they're just, you know, average. Oh, and you're gonna see later the tricky thing that I'm doing is scoring all this. But as for the tubing shape, it's just kind of round everywhere, and I like hydroform tubing. So I'll give the overall shape of the tubing and the feel there, I'll give that a 2 out of 5. Other reviews on this bike mentioned how it's the most compliant hardtail around. And a compliant hardtail means even though there's no rear suspension, that the frame will flex in a way to absorb all the bumps. And I just don't see how it could be with round tubing pretty much everywhere. I mean, I guess they could change the thickness of the tubing, but there's just no way of checking that. But let's go ride. All right, well, we've been riding for quite a bit now off camera. Charles, how long do you think you've been riding for?
I think about 50 minutes.
Yeah, 50 minutes. Yeah, so I've got a pretty good sense of how this bike fits. And I'm 5'9", and I'm right on the edge of maybe wanting a longer stem. But other than that, I just love the long wheelbase. But for the fit, I'll give it a 4.3. The compliance, I actually feel it on this iteration. The last iteration, I didn't feel any compliance pretty much at all. So I don't know if they did anything different or if it matters that it actually fits me better, but I do feel that this thing is absorbing bumps. So I'll give the compliance a 3.8. All right, let's go climb this thing. This thing climbs pretty good, and I really like how they made the C-tube angle a lot more forward. So at the end of the day, it's still an average climber, so I'm gonna give it a 3.5 out of 5. And I know 3 sounds bad, but you know, 3 is average. We're going for perfection. All right, now it's time for some fun. Oh yeah, let's get ready for some flow. Jumps, turns. Oh yeah, so much flow. Got some turns. Oh, it turns so well. All right, let's see the compliance, braking bumps. Oh, barely felt them. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, so much flow. This thing rides like a BMX bike. As for the flow, man, this bike flows so well. Kicker lip. Yeah. I'm gonna give the flow a 5. This bike is so good with flow. All right, for the cornering, way better than the last version. I'm gonna give the cornering, wow, whoa, a little bit too much speed. I'll give the cornering a 4.2. All right, let's test some jumps. Oh yeah, yeah. All right, I'm gonna give the jumping 5. Yeah, let's go. Bonus line. Yeah. Oh yeah. All right, sorry, got a little sidetracked. That brings me to the last category, and that is probably the most important, tech. I think a hardtail's ability to ride technical single track is way more important than flow. I mean, where I'm from in Phoenix, there was no flow trails at all. And if I'm gonna get some seat time and grind out some miles in the woods, I'm taking a hardtail, so let's go find out. Yeah, when I'm not filming for the channel, I spend most of my time riding this kind of stuff. Yeah, I love this kind of stuff, man. Yeah, I need something stable and precise, if that makes sense. Oh yeah, high line. Oh, I love this stuff. Yes. Yeah, so I give the single track a 4.5. Really fun doing this kind of stuff on this bike. All right, the second to last category is tech climbing. Not bad, not bad. Oh yeah. Yeah, so I'll give tech climbing it was average, nothing too crazy. I'll give it a 3.8. All right, last category, chunk. Oh yeah. Oh, this thing is peppy. Let's go. Man, that chunk was fun. I think I'm gonna have to give the chunk a 4 out of 5, but let's head back to the shop. Wow, what a blast. So with the scoring, not every category is gonna be worth the same. Sure, everything gets scored out of 5, but then it's gonna be weighted for importance. Just like the looks doesn't matter as much as actually how the bike rides and feels, and also single track matters more than flowy jump lines. So with that, I've got myself a leaderboard, starting with the last gen Ragley with a respectable 60 out of 100. Yeah, in terms of grade school, that's a D-, but this isn't Miss Thompson's class. I'm scoring hardtails very strictly, and if something is average, 3 out of 5. I don't want to be throwing around 5 out of 5s unless something is really special. So that gives the final score of the 2023 Ragley Big Al a 80 out of 100. Wow, with the way it felt, almost like my old BMX bike, I actually expected a lot higher of a score, but stay tuned, we got a lot more hardtails to test. So after each episode with this full season video, I'm gonna drop a little bit of extended commentary about that frame. This Ragley Big Al was a really fun frame, and like I said, I'm surprised as how low the score was. I think a big part of that was the new revamped frame was just way bigger than the previous generation with a 455 millimeter reach. On some brands, that was like the difference between a medium and a medium long. Fun fact, the Ragley Big Al was the lightest frame in the series too. I'm 5'9", and I just remeasured that the other day because someone told me I look taller, but I think this medium would have been a serious contender for the Hardtail Quest winner if I was like an inch or two taller. And I don't think I mentioned it within the video, but this Ragley also had the lowest bottom bracket out of the bunch. And I'll leave a link to the spreadsheets for all the frames geometry and scores, so you can check that out for yourself. After doing this whole season, I'm still not sure the correlation between, if there is a correlation between low bottom brackets and being a good bike on jump lines. Because this Ragley was so good at jumping, and it was, spoiler alert, it was the best at jumping out of all the frames that I tested. And I'd be curious to see how it would ride set up with some big beefy tires and ridden on some proper chunk. But overall, with the low cost of the frame and how good it rode, I definitely recommend it. Today, I'm hoping that this bike, a Nukeproof Scout 290 Elite, is even better than the Ragley. But I've done some research, and on paper, I don't think it's going to be. Before we strip down both bikes, I have to change the Ragley's score. I rode the bike again off camera and I was just getting beat up. So I'm lowering the compliance score to 3.2, and then I'm lowering the score on chunk to 3.5. But it's not all negative. I found that the bike is really good at tech climbing, so I'm gonna raise that to 4.5. So that changes the overall score down just a point to 79. But let's strip down both bikes. So this is the Nukeproof Scout 290 Elite, and if I look at the geometry numbers, I just don't think there's any way that this bike is gonna beat out the Ragley. There's just no way. But geometry aside, the build quality of this frame is top notch. I love on hardtails when the top tube forms a straight line to the rear triangle, plus 2 water ball cage mounts, multiple rubber guards, and a UDH if you care about that sort of thing, I give the build a 4.33. Then the tubing shape, and oh boy, I am in love with this rounded head tube. Then you have some hydroform tubing in the front and a really beefy rear triangle. But will that mean it's too stiff? But I will say, just looking at this thing, it gives me confidence, and I'll give it a 4 out of 5. So I was sent this bike as a complete, the Nukeproof Scout 290 Elite, and it retails for $3,000. That sounds wild for a hardtail, but after riding it like that for a few weeks, it was a ton of fun. Fox 36 fork, Shimano SLX group set, DT Swiss wheels, and aggressive tires. I mean, talk about perfect right out of the box. But let's take a deep dive into the geometry, and here's where it gets confusing. With this Nukeproof, there's some big differences in geometry numbers compared to the Ragley. The first being the stack height is 13 millimeters lower, and a high stack will help the bike feel nice and tall, so going lower is definitely concerning. The head tube angle is 64.5, 1 degree steeper than the Ragley, but dude, 64.5? That's still super slack for today's standards. The wheelbase on this frame is also 36 millimeters shorter, which is a major loss. On the Ragley, that's what I think I liked most about the bike, a long stretched out wheelbase, and Mark commented saying that a hardtail having anything less than 1200 millimeters wheelbase means that it's not gonna ride well, and I hope that's not the case. Then the big one, the Scout's reach is 15 millimeters shorter. The reach is a great indicator of how big or small the frame is, and with a 440 reach, that's the same number as my first Ragley that I had, and that bike felt way too small. So with everything being way smaller, is this Scout not gonna work out? Oh, real quick, check this out. I may have splurged a little bit and got myself an upgrade. Cane Creek E-Wings. I wanted to get myself a present to celebrate hitting 100,000 subscribers, and a big thank you to everyone for making this stream possible. I bought these used for $600 from a friend, but the only issue is I don't have any tie prep. And whenever titanium touches a different kind of metal like aluminum, you have to use tie prep to prevent the different metals from eating each other, called galvanic corrosion. Well, I don't have any on hand. I ordered some, but I think it'll be all right for like a week, right? But the bike is complete, and I didn't swap out the seat post and the seat. I hope you'll forgive me about that. But dude, I just love external cable routing. It makes frame swapping super easy. So the only question now is, what do you think of the yellow? Dang, I just love how this Nukeproof turned out with all of my parts. I'm finding that the yellow paint job looks amazing, but it really shows grease and grime just way too easily. But speaking of, I actually got some tie prep in the mail and I applied it before the first ride. But man, that stuff gets everywhere. But for the looks, I'm gonna give it a 4.024. As for the fit, I am just so confused. So with the Ragley, I measured the bars from the ground to the top of the bars. And like I said earlier, this stack height is 13 millimeters lower. Well, on the Nukeproof, the bar height is the exact same, using the same stem, bars, spacer. So I am just more confused than ever. And what that tells me is we gotta take all the geometry numbers, sagged, unsagged, and just throw them right out the window. We just gotta go ride this thing. Well, I'm gonna go a little out of order with the scoring today because we're at Slaughter Pen instead of Kohler. So let's start off testing single track and compliance. Oh yeah, I love single track. I can already tell some things about this bike. Oh yeah, tech climb. Wow, that just ate that up. Well, even though the bars are the same height, I can definitely tell that the front end feels lower, but it's actually not a bad thing. Being in the saddle, climbing, I actually like it more. It's more of like a road bike position. And the single track is where this bike shines the most, dude. I think I'm gonna have to give this bike, for a single track, I'm gonna give it a 5. This bike is so good. Yeah, so with this bike being a little bit smaller, it is actually way more precise on the single track, a little bit more peppy on the single track, and just overall a little bit more fun. But we gotta go hit the jumps to see if it'll sacrifice there. All right, let's go test some jumps, but first, we gotta climb this thing. All right, normally this climb sucks. It's called Lombard, the trail, or on Strava it's called 22 turns, because that's how many turns it takes to get to the top. But this bike climbs super well. Even though the reach is shorter, the C2 must be more laid back because the riding position, just sitting here grinding out miles, it's way better to pedal. So I'm gonna give the climbing a 4.33. All right, let's test out some flow. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh man, pretty fun, but I think I'm gonna have to give the flow a 3.8. All right, let's test out jumping and cornering. Yeah, whoa. All right, so the cornering is actually better than the Ragley. I'm gonna give it a 4.4. Pretty good. Oh yeah, got some jumps here. Oh yeah, well for the jumping, it's not quite as good as the Ragley. So I'm gonna have to give the jumping a 3.875. All right, let's go ride some chunk. All right, here we go. We got some tech climbs. The Ragley was so good at this. Whoa, yeah. Yeah, pretty good tech climber. Maybe not as good as the Ragley. Whoa. So I'll give it a 4 on tech climbs. All right, time to hit some chunk. All right, here comes the chunk. Not really a fan of this section. Hopefully my tires hold up. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'll give the chunk a 4.3. Yeah. Well, for the compliance, do you think the titanium cranks would make a difference? I doubt it, but I got something to say about the compliance, and I've never said anything like this before, and it's actually kind of cringy to say it, but just know that it's a big deal for me saying this. This Nukeproof Scout Hardtail actually rides like a full suspension. It can eat up all the bumps, and I barely feel anything. So I'm gonna give it a 4.5 on compliance, but let's head back to the house because we got one more score to do, and then we'll talk about the overall. Wow, what a bike. I did not expect the Scout to do that well, but the only thing left to score is the fit, and I did my best not to let the geometry numbers create a bias. I just rode the thing, and sitting on the bike, I felt higher up, almost like a horse jockey. But then when I rode it, it actually felt super comfortable, especially grinding out the miles. I couldn't feel the shorter reach, wheelbase, or stack. It just felt great. So I'll give it a 4.7. So what this tells me is geometry numbers are kind of just numbers at the end of the day. Everything on the Nukeproof created this magical synergy, and it just worked, even though the geometry numbers look kind of sus. If you have an idea of what geometry numbers contributed to this amazing ride feeling, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to learn myself. But that brings us to the overall score for the Scout, and it wasn't as good as the Ragley on the flow trails and the jumping, but it was better in every other area, making it just a really great all-around frame. So that brings us to the final score of 87 out of 100. Man, that's gonna be hard to beat. Hey, Future Evan again. That Nukeproof Scout was truly an amazing hardtail. And spoiler alert, It got one of the top scores in the whole series. But for this post-episode commentary, I'm gonna keep it a little bit short because at the end of this whole thing, I put it together one last time and rode it one more time against the winner to see if it still felt special to me. So skip ahead to that comparison with the eventual winner or stay tuned for some more epic hardtails. Today, this bike might change all of that. A Trek Roscoe, the most highly requested bike for this series. This is a custom build that I picked up from the pros closet, and this is my first big name brand bike, and I have my doubts. I don't really know much about Trek bikes. I've never had one before. Well, there was that one time, and I'm pretty confused. They have this in-between size called medium/large, and I've never seen that before. But I mean, it makes sense. Trek is mostly sold in bike shops, and people can try them out before they buy them. But I needed something quickly for this series. So I reached out to a Trek connoisseur, Matty Active. We're about the same height. I think he's 5'8", I'm 5'9". He runs a medium large and said that I should get the same size too. And I really hope that's not a mistake, but more about the geometry in a minute. We gotta strip this thing down. So obviously I left a lot of parts on, and you'll see why in a second, but let's score the build quality. Obviously there's a pretty gigantic Trek logo to lure in potential buyers at bike shops, but if we look a little closer, the welds are pretty good. There's also 2 water bottle cage mounts and a UDH if you care about that. This bike is just super refined, 4.2. Then the tubing shape. The head tube has this unique shape. I like it, it looks pretty good. Then the down tube is curved to make space for more water bottle storage. And I really like how the rear triangle flares out a little bit for the brake caliper. I'll give the tubing shape a 4.3. Maybe I'm wrong about Trek. So this is the first frame in the series with internal cable routing, and I'm not happy about it. It actually looks super clean, I gotta admit, but the internal cable routing makes swapping out brakes in a drivetrain way more difficult. So I'm just gonna leave it on. The XX1 drivetrain is a step above what I have, plus I don't think brakes will ruin the test. But for consistency, I'll still be using my wheels, forks, cranks, and bars. But let's get into the geometry, and this frame is interesting. To start off, the head tube angle is the steepest we've tested, 65 degrees, but still very slack. Then the stack is the lowest that we've tested at 639 millimeters. And I really liked having a high stack on the Ragley and the Nukeproof, so this Roscoe already kind of has me concerned. But then here's what I'm most concerned about, the reach. This medium large is 455 millimeters, the same reach as the Ragley. After I tested the Ragley, I honestly thought that it was the perfect reach, and I moved forward having this bike sent to me. But then I tested the Nukeproof Scout with a 440 reach, and I thought it was gonna be too small for me, but it blew my mind. It was actually nimble, good at climbing, single track, pedaling. It was a great all-around bike, but on the Ragley with a 455 reach, it was only good at jumping and flow, and it was a so-so everywhere else. So will this Roscoe fit the same as the Ragley and have the same problems? Then the wheelbase. It has a modest 1198 millimeters, but the chainstay is the shortest out of all the bikes that we tested, 430 millimeters. So maybe that means this bike will manual and wheelie well. The last geo number that I want to bring up is the bottom bracket height. With the Scout, I felt high up, I liked it, and the bottom bracket height was 307 millimeters. Well, the Roscoe has a way higher bottom bracket, 321 millimeters. These geometry numbers are all over the place, higher here, lower there, and I have no clue how this bike is gonna ride. But with that, the bike is complete, and dude, what do you guys think about how it looks? Well guys, Trek might be proving me wrong here. With everything together, my parts, the logos, the tubing shape, this is the coolest looking bike that we've done. So I'm gonna give it a 4.5, making this bike already ahead of the rest even before we hit the trail. All right, we're back at Slaughter Pen, same place we tested the Scout. Let's see how this funky geometry goes. All right, we're going straight into tech climbing today. Ugh. Oh yeah, I got some mud. Not bad. So I'll spare you guys because, I mean, tech climbing, it's fun to do, not that fun to watch. But this bike, is a pretty good tech climber. Not as good as the Ragley, but I'll give the tech climbing a 4.22. All right, we're at the flow trails. Let's hit it. Yeah, so for the flow, I mean, it's pretty good. I like how it's stable and all that, but I think I'll give the flow, it's not as good as the Ragley. I'll give the flow a 4.4. Pretty fun though. Oh yeah. Well, this bike is a very average climber. And I really don't like how the front triangle just feels gigantic. I feel like stretched out. It's almost like I want the bars to be like way more narrow to compensate for that really long reach. And I don't like it, it feels uncomfortable. So I'll give the climbing I'm just gonna give it a 3. But let's hit these jumps. Yeah, for cornering, I don't know, it's average. I'll give it a 3.5 on cornering. But now we're getting to some jumps. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it's honestly a really good jumper. So maybe I'm onto something that the bigger bikes jump better. So I'm gonna give it a 4.8 for jumping. Let's go test some single track. All right, time for some single track. This is my favorite trail called Ozone. Not as nimble, I'll tell you that. Yeah. I honestly kind of feel like a goon. Oh. It's almost like I'm fighting this thing. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh. Dude, I don't know what it is. Like, this bike kind of feels too big or what, but it's like, even my fork doesn't feel that great. Like, you just saw the front wheel just got totally deflected. And that's been happening a lot. I've been bottoming out the fork more and more, and I have not touched the settings on the fork at all. So I'll give the single track a 2.5, but let's keep testing. All right, let's test out some chunk. Let's see how compliant this bike is. Here we go. Oh. Here comes the rock garden. Oh, that was horrible. Boy, we got more chunk. Oh. All right, I'm gonna give the chunk a 2. Well, still good at jumping, but let's talk compliance. Well, the compliance, meaning the way that the frame kind of absorbs bumps, I hear such great things about this Trek Roscoe, but it feels like I got punched in the head going over those rock gardens. And even on the single track, it's just really bumpy all the time. So I'm gonna give I think this frame is too stiff, and I'm gonna give the compliance a 1.5, but I think I have an idea about that. Let's go head back to the shop. Well, that did not go well, and I think I have an idea why, and it's gotta be because of the fit. This bike just felt way too big for me. Sitting on it here at the shop, it felt good, and I probably would have picked a medium large at a bike shop too, but I really didn't like how long the front triangle felt compared to the rear, so I'm gonna give the fit a 2 out of 5. But I think I may be onto something here. The Ragley and the Trek both had a 455 reach. Both bikes were great jumpers and tech climbers, but didn't ride well when it came to compliance. So does that mean if a bike is too big for you, then maybe it can't absorb bumps as well? Let me know what you think. I actually kind of feel bad about this test, and I should have stuck with the rules, medium size only, despite what the website recommended. And I almost feel like the scoring isn't fair to the Roscoe, and here's what I'll do. If I get enough comments, I'll buy a medium, fork out like 750 bucks, and I'll redo this entire test, but in a few weeks though. But that brings the overall score down to a measly 60 out of 100. And moving forward, no more breaking rules, and I don't think I have any more frames coming up that are as big as the Trek and the Ragley. Before I talk about this medium Trek situation, a moment from this video's sponsor, Element. Element is the best electrolyte pack on the market, and I always have one on me during my rides. Element is different from other electrolyte packs on the market because they have 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Other brands don't have that much sodium, but that's really one of the most important electrolytes you need for hydration so your muscles can function. So even though I'm going on a short ride, I always have an Element pack with me just in case I start feeling dehydrated. They're sold through Amazon, Walmart, and even some European retailers. But if you head to drinkelement.com/Evan and get the 120 pack, it's just about $1.10 per serving, one of the best deal electrolytes on the market. Plus, they'll throw in a free sample pack with any order so you can try out all the flavors. Right now, mine is grapefruit salt. So thanks to Element for sponsoring this big video. Now let's get back into it. So I know you just heard me say that I'd buy the Trek and the medium, and that it was just probably too big for me. And I got a ton of comments, and I really thank everyone for doing that, but I did not buy the medium, and here's why. So after testing 8 hardtails in 8 weeks, I think I got a pretty firm grasp on what makes a hardtail good. And I also got some insight into these companies that put out the hardtails. Some of the best hardtails came from smaller brands like RSD, The Bird, even Ragley. These companies are small, so they have to put out a really good product because they don't have millions of dollars to market their product. They rely on word of mouth, so they have to put the best product out there. I really enjoyed talking with the smaller brands, even asking questions about designing the bike the way that they did, or just the intended setup. I did get some insights, and it was super cool being that connected to the brand, and I'd gladly pay a little bit more money for a frame like that. Then you have Trek, and I'm just making assumptions here. This is my personal opinion, but let me know if you think I'm onto something here. I think Trek, making millions and millions of dollars a year, cares more about high volume and selling as many bikes as possible. Then these companies want to make money, so a high priority when designing the frame is most likely to avoid warranty claims. So that means making a frame beefy and strong to avoid cracks and mishaps. But I'm just assuming here, I don't think they factor in ride quality as much as volume and warranty claims. So because of that assumption and me testing all these frames, this series was already expensive enough. I think it would probably be more of the same on a properly sized medium Trek. And I know a lot of people, that's gonna disappoint a lot of people, but hey, I just saved $700 for my kids' college fund. So on to the next frame. Before I build up this beautiful frame, I gotta rip off all of my parts off the Roscoe, get that bike back to stock, because I gotta send it back to the pros closet. Now with that trek behind us, it's time to check out this beautiful hardtail, a Banshee Paradox V3, the most expensive hardtail frame that we've tested. But first, a little ASMR. Well, how satisfying was that? This Banshee Paradox frame is just a work of art, and I am just super excited to try out an exotic hardtail. And the build quality of this frame is probably the best that I've ever seen, and I just love raw aluminum. I mean, check out my first ever BMX frame right here. This is my 1997, Powerlight Junior, and look, silver. The Banshee is a raw, or maybe it's brushed aluminum with a clear coat, and the welds are the best that we've seen so far. The cable routing is a hybrid external and internal cable routing, but it even came pre-installed with headset cups and a goodie bag with a seat post clamp and an extra derailleur hanger. This is definitely the most expensive frame that we tested at $960, but will those few extra $100 make a difference? I sure hope so. I would give this bike a 5 out of 5 on build quality, but I would have liked to see some water bottle cage mounts, even if it was on the underbelly of the down tube, 4.9. And then you have the tubing shape, and this is where I am super intrigued. If you look near the seat post, there's these flat pieces welded together, hollowed out if you will, and I really wonder if this is gonna act as a flex point to make this frame super compliant. Every single tube on this frame is hydroformed, well, maybe not the seat post, but I have really, really high hopes for this frame, and I'm gonna give the tubing shape a 5 out of 5. Now that we're halfway through season 1 of Hardtail Quest, I'm starting to understand some geometry numbers that I really like and some that I don't like. Well, with this Banshee, it really checks off some geometry numbers that I love from the previous frames, and also some geometry numbers that are kind of concerning. First is the all-important reach. The Trek just felt too big with a 455mm reach, and then the Scout had a 440 reach, a tad small, but rode great. Well, the Banshee Paradox is just a tad bigger than the Scout with a 443mm reach, so that might feel a touch better than the Scout, which is currently ranked number 1. There are some geometry numbers that I'm worried about, like the bottom bracket height being the highest out of all the bikes, and I thought with the Scout that I felt kind of high up, but it turns out that had the lowest bottom bracket, and I really like that. The head tube angle and the wheelbase are very moderate, right there in the middle of all the other frames. And I'm pretty glad they didn't just make the geometry just hardcore in every sense. Then there's some numbers that really stand out more than all the frames. The stack height is 651mm, right up there with the Scout, and I really like that tall bar feeling. Then the chainstay is 425mm, the shortest out of all the bikes, and I really like the Trek's short chainstay, and maybe this Banshee will be even better at doing wheelies. Lastly, the seat tube angle is the steepest by far at 76.3 degrees, and that could really help with steep tech climbs or just overall comfort while sitting on the seat. And sitting down on the saddle is really where most of the time is spent on the bike. So with this bike having some extreme yet middle of the road geometry numbers, this could be interesting, and I have a lot of questions on how this is gonna go. But with that, the bike is complete, and dude, doesn't this look amazing? So what do you guys think? Is this the best looking bike so far? But I'm actually gonna take away some points before we even go ride this thing. I think with the build quality, the cable routing could have been a bit better. And down here by the bottom bracket, the cables are just kind of touching the frame, and I don't know if that's gonna lead to rattling. So I'm gonna reduce the build quality down to 4.7. And then with the tubing shape, man, this head tube is so dang long. I almost didn't get to use my fork. And then the front triangle could have been a bit bigger so I could fit a bigger water bottle. So I'm gonna reduce the tubing shape down to 4.7. But with the looks, man, you guys know I have a soft spot in my heart for raw aluminum. And I even like the decals, how they're just super subtle. And then the logo on the bottom, you wouldn't be able to see unless you're throwing a major flatty. So I'm gonna give the looks a 5 out of 5. But that makes this bike, this frame, the new virtual leader before even hitting the trails. But that's the same thing that happened with the Trek, and look how that went. Let's go ride. All right, we're back at Slaughter Pen for yet another test. And I actually rode this bike yesterday. I hadn't really mentioned that except in the comments, but I'm doing about 6 hours of riding time on all of these frames to get a really good opinion. But yeah, yesterday I rode this bike and it didn't go that well. And actually, I almost wiped out a couple times. So what's going on is the bars feel kind of low, and I think that's because the bottom bracket is so high up. So I actually put a taller rise bar on here, and I also felt a little cramped, and I put a longer stem on. So hopefully that makes a big difference, but let's see how this bike rides. All right, warm-up complete. Feels a little bit better, but I'm still a little bit worried. But let's go test out some single track. Oh yeah, wheelie's good. Oh yeah. Well, not a bad climber. It's kind of average. I'll give it a 3.7. Oh great, right into a tech climb. It's too early for this. Oh, I made it. Yeah, I think I'm gonna revise the climbing down to 3.2 actually. This bike is just so tall, so high up. And the seat tube is like really vertical. So like I'm just like sitting straight up. And I bet people would like that for those who don't like climbing that much. But for me, it's like, I like grinding out those miles. So this, not the most comfortable climber. Oh yeah, not bad. I think I have an idea of how this bike rides and like what it wants. But I can't quite comment on that just yet until I do some further testing on some chunk. But single track is not bad. I think I'm gonna give the single track I'll give the single track a 4.2. This is pretty nimble. One more thing about single track, and it feels kind of dorky to say this, but I actually kind of feel like I'm pretty fast on this bike. It just like rolls really good, but I know that's kind of a dorky thing to say. All right, time for some flow. Yeah, so for flow, this thing is kind of average. Yeah, I'm gonna give the flow I'll give it a 3.5. Oh yeah. Time for some jumps and cornering. Yeah. Yeah, the cornering, it actually is really good at cornering. Probably the short wheelbase. So I'm gonna give the cornering a 4.7 actually. And manual's good, but that's not one of the categories. And for the jumping, oh, this might be too windy right here. Oh, no, we good. The jumping, I'm still kind of timid about jumping after almost going down yesterday. And I just don't feel like this bike is that good of a jumper. So I'm gonna give the jumping a 3, actually. Sorry, it is what it is. But I think I have an idea of what this bike is built for, and that brings us to compliance and chunk. Let's go hit it. All right, here's the tech climb. Let's go. Oh man, this bike is so good at tech climbing. I'm gonna give the tech climbing, it's actually kind of surprising. I'm gonna give the tech climbing a 5 out of 5 because I've never been able to climb that before. And that was actually super easy. So, I don't know, this bike is strange, but let's test out some chunk. All right, time for some chunk. This one's called Dragon Scales. It is so dang hot today. Sweat is like dumping in my eyeball. Oh yeah. Whoa. Yeah. Oh yeah, I figured this bike out and it's right here on this chunk. This chunk is so good. I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 5. Yeah. Well, all right, man. I'm glad I figured out that bike right there at the end. I was getting worried about the compliance, and I really had high hopes for how this bike absorbed bumps because of this little flex stay right here. And I expected this thing to be flexing nonstop, but it really is only working on the big hits in the rock gardens. I almost feel like I had like a shock on the rear end that was like really a stiff shock, but it definitely flexes a lot in a good way on the chunk and not so much on the single track. And for that reason, I'll give the overall compliance, I'll give it a 4, but let's head back to the shop. We'll talk about the fit and we'll talk about where this bike is probably best at. This Banshee Paradox is an actual, true, hardcore hardtail, and this frame belongs on the roughest, most technical trails, but that does not fit my criteria, and the bike was just kind of strange in other areas. And remember, I'm grading on categories being weighted for importance, with single track being a major factor. I want a hardtail that's really fun on my local trails, so let's see what the overall score comes out to. The last score to give is the fit, and like I was saying, this bike felt tall, but I also felt kind of crammed because of the steep seat posts in the lower reach. The long stem definitely helped it out, but I was just never able to get comfortable on the frame, so I'm gonna give the fit a 3.5. But I can admit that I wanted this frame to win this entire series. I just love how it looks, but I can separate that while scoring and riding these things. So it's a bummer to say that the overall score comes out to 80 out of 100, making this Banshee Paradox a distant second to the leader, the Nukeproof Scout. So I'll come clean, I'll straight up admit it. I wanted the Banshee to win the whole series. It's such a beautiful frame, such a work of art. I don't really know why I thought so highly about it. I really haven't seen any media from Banshee, and I never have seen one in person, so I don't know where I got this huge favorability for the Banshee. But since I wanted it to win so badly, I think I plan on building it up as a trail smasher, enduro hardtail, and I think that'd be where the bike shines the most, and I would still recommend that Banshee. Here in Bentonville, we don't really have super steep stuff, but to be honest, I don't really like riding super steep stuff anyway, but I have a feeling that's where the Banshee shines the most. So maybe I'll do that build and take it to Enduro Park. So I'm not done with the Banshee just yet, so stay tuned for a build on that one. So this is the highly requested Rocky Mountain Growler 20 that I bought from a local bike shop for $1,200. And I gotta say, I'm pretty disappointed. And I need a win here, guys. We have to go all the way back to episode 2 where I was having an absolute blast on the Nukeproof Scout, but now we're on episode 5 and it's been a tough couple weeks with the Trek and then the Banshee. Now, I've heard so many people rant and rave about this Rocky Mountain frame being such a gnarly frame, able to eat up chunk, super compliant, and that's why I put $1,200 of my own money to make this test happen. But the biggest disappointment is the spec. You know, the parts that are on the frame. $1,200 is a lot of money, especially for a hardtail. So when I saw this bike came with a coil fork with chrome stanchions, I was like, what? Plus, the website, I feel, tries to hide the fact that it comes with chrome stanchions with some deceptive photos. And when you see chrome stanchions, especially in 2023, it equals a cheap fork. And even Walmart has moved away from that due to the stigma. But somehow it still has a boost through axle, so that's good news. There's also cheap Clark's brakes, wire bead tires on some cheap wheels, and a generic square tapered bottom bracket. This bike in its stock form is super heavy too, 36.2 pounds. Also, it has a Shimano Dior 10-speed drivetrain, but it's not the long cage version, so it would have to be replaced if you wanted a bigger cassette or more gears. So for $1,200, you basically get a bike that maybe has huge potential because of the frame, but pretty much everything will need to be upgraded. And I just think there's a lot better deals on hardtails out there. And plus, if this bike doesn't win Hardtail Quest and become my personal hardtail, I'm gonna have to sell it, and I probably would only be able to get like $900 for it. But putting the price aside, the important thing here for the Hardtail Quest is that this frame is upgradable because it has all of today's standards. It has a boost through axle front and rear, BSA bottom bracket, comes with a dropper post, and a tapered head tube. So with that, we can go ahead and move forward with pimping this bike out and see if it lives up to the hype. But first, we gotta strip these bikes down. Now that the Rocky Mountain is apart, I cannot believe a hardtail this expensive came with an unsealed headset. I mean, come on, $1,200 hardtail here. Then the bottom bracket was super hard to get off, but luckily I had all the tools. But think about the people that buy this bike as their first bike, then they go to upgrade it because everything needs to be upgraded and have to drop a bunch of cash to get all the tools to upgrade this thing. Whew. All right, deep breath. Let's hope this frame is like a sleeper build or something, and maybe it's gonna be the best frame that I've ever ridden, who knows. But we have the frame stripped down, so let's focus on reviewing the frame, starting with the build quality. And right off the bat, I'm super bummed that there's internal cable routing because I had to cut the brake hose, which is another daunting task for a newcomer. But the welds are pretty good for machine welds, and the frame overall is just pretty simplistic. I mean, it does make it super clean looking, but there's not really a lot to be said about it other than it's just kind of average. I'll give it a 2 out of 5. Then the tubing shape. And this frame has the most narrow tubing out of all the bikes that we've tested or are going to test. So this frame either has some super thick aluminum or it's gonna ride like a wet noodle. And if you look closely, the tubing is hydroformed, which is nice. And I've had the bike in my garage for about 2 weeks now, and I've probably checked 10 times to make sure it has a through axle, because usually bikes this cheap looking don't come with that. But I'll give the tubing shape a 1. But man, I am just burning a bridge here with Rocky Mountain. Oh well. But seriously, I got so many comments to include this bike in Hardtail Quest, and if it wasn't for all you guys, I would not have bought this bike to test it, so you guys better not be letting me down here. But I did check out the geometry, and it does actually look pretty good. The head tube angle is super raked out at 64 degrees, giving this bike huge potential in steep chunk. Then the reach is a bit longer than what I've been liking at 450 millimeters. And living up to the mountain bike trends of long, slack, and low, the wheelbase is the second longest out of all the frames, 1,210 millimeters. So just those geometry numbers alone, this bike is very similar to the Ragley Big, but just a tad less long and slack. But the bottom bracket is a bit higher at 313 millimeters, but not super high and uncomfortable like the Roscoe and the Banshee. The stack is the lowest out of all the frames that we've tested, and tall bars are super awesome, but after the Banshee last week, I think I found a limit of how high up I want to feel while riding a hardtail. The seat tube is moderate, 75 degrees, and the chainstay is a bit long at 435, the longest out of all the bikes. So this frame and all the geometry numbers really gives me the impression that it's going to be good at high speeds and perform well on steep stuff, but honestly, if I'm riding steep chunk trails, I'll probably just take my full suspension, and I'd much rather be taking a hardtail out for single track and flow trails. And from what we found out on this quest to find the best hardtail is that long, slack geometry is not that great on single track, so we'll see how this bike rides. Oh, and quick update, since I built up these bird wheels, I've been using a center lock to 6-bolt adapter, which everyone warned me about not to do. And it's been about 6 months now, and I'm just now noticing the adapter and rotor are a bit wonky. So I bit the bullet and bought some new rotors from the Roscoe, link and code in the description. But with that, the bike is complete, and I did cheat a little bit. I zip tied my cables on the outside instead of routing them inside the frame, bleeding the brakes, all that headache. But what do you guys think about how it looks? Well, let's talk about the looks, and I don't know, I kind of like how it turned out. The bike overall is just kind of clean, even though the paint sometimes in the right light looks kind of pinkish. I'm man enough to ride a pink bike, but I wish it was a little bit more just hot rod red. But for the looks, I do kind of like it. I'm gonna give it a 4.2. Let's go ride. Now, I know I said last video that I get about 6 hours of riding in on each frame just to get a really good feel for it. But this time, I'm a little under the weather. Maybe you can hear it with my voice. So this is literally the first time I'm riding this other than on the street. And what I did is the bike actually fits pretty good. But it was a little strange with the short stem I usually use. And I swapped it out for a longer stem and also some taller bars. And then I moved the seat forward and the bike actually fits really well. But I can't yet give it that an official score because, I mean, this is my very first time I'm pedaling it. Well, just like I normally do, let's get warmed up on some jumps. It's been raining, so it's gonna be hero dirt today. Oh yeah, pretty good. Well, I gotta say, this is actually off to a pretty good start. Oh, hold on. Yeah. For a bike that is in last place on build quality and all the looks and everything, this is pretty good. But let's hit some single track. Well, this bike actually climbs super well. And I know it's a little early to be throwing out scores, but so far this climbing, I think it might be in the running to be a better climber than the Nukeproof Scout. I don't know, man. Yeah, there's something about the bike with the seat post and the bottom bracket and just how it feels sitting on it. And I can't quite put my finger on it, but I'm taking the long way today since I'm solo. So we got several more miles of single track to really feel out this bike and see how it goes. Let's hit it. Oh man, I can already tell this bike is pretty compliant on the little bumps on the single track. Whoa. Whoa. Where am I going? Yeah, the last two bikes with the Trek and the Banshee, I didn't really have a fun time while riding those, to be completely honest with you. And I think this is the week where I have fun again. Well, I don't think I went the right way. But right there is a flow trail. I think I might just take a little side quest. Whew. All right, here goes nothing. This is a high-speed flow trail. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, the turning feels a little sluggish. Oh yeah. Dang, camera got tilted. Yeah, so the turning felt a little sluggish, but it was weird. It actually felt like it had traction very well, like it was hugging the ground. And that's not something that I felt on the other bikes so far. But let's get back on that single track and gotta stay focused. All right, here's a little bit of tech. Oh, not bad. Not bad at all. Bike feels a little long. We'll talk more about that later. Well, I'm finally ready to give out my first score while riding, and it's going to be for single track. And this bike, it feels a little too long. Like, I don't know, just every kind of move I make with the turning and everything, it has to be a little bit more exaggerated, a little bit more drawn out, which will probably be good for the high speed stuff. But for single track, I just kind of sluggish. And also my back wheel gets kind of hung up on things where I wish the rear end was a little bit shorter. So with a single track, I'm gonna have to give the score a 4.6. Well, first up is the flow trail called Catapult. Let's hit it. Yeah. Oh, I need a shift. Wow, okay. Thing corners well. Yeah. Wow, okay. Interesting for sure. Yeah. Oh. Damn. That's got like a major rim strike on a rock. Well, I was gonna throw out a flow score during that run, but I got distracted. I was having too much fun. But the flow, man, I think the flow is like, it's right up there with that Ragley Big Owl. Remember that got a 5 out of 5 on flow. This bike is super stable in corners. I'm gonna give the flow a 4.6. So the climbing is a little bit, I could probably get used to the length and the pronounced movements and everything when climbing, but I feel like my weight is kind of pressed on my bars a little bit more than I'd like to. And it was the same way with the smaller stem and smaller bars. So I'm sure I'd get used to it over time, but it's just a tiny bit uncomfortable, and I don't want like numb hands at the end of the ride. So I'm gonna give the climbing a 4.1, but it's still a really good climber. I'm impressed with this bike. Even though I was talking major smack on it, the spec is awful. I'm gonna stick to that. But even though I was talking major crap on this bike, I mean, I'm impressed so far. But let's hit the jump trail and let's see how it corners. All right, this next one is medieval. Time for some jumps and cornering. Oh, I need a shift. Yeah, so what do you guys think about how this is filmed? I mean, obviously I don't have a cameraman for this one. Yeah, but I got a chest cam, I got the bar mount, and sometimes a tripod. It's been hard getting a cameraman. Now Charles is back in school, so I'm solo again. But I'm basically asking your permission. Like, I want to make good content for you guys. Entertaining stuff. Well, I got a checkup right here. real loose. Yeah. Shoot, I forgot to do a score. Yeah, basically I'm asking if it's okay if I just do action camera footage, because I mean, it's obviously the easiest just doing a chest camera footage, chest camera. Obviously I can add in a bar camera, and that's a little bit more complex. And then doing the tripod, that's like the most amount of work. But I'm asking you guys, what do you want? What do you want me, how do you want me to film these? And I'd love your feedback. But I've been riding right now for about, how long have I been riding for? I've been out here like 2 hours now. But right about now is when I take my ketone IQ. Stuff is awesome. Followed up with my carb mixture here. And I'll be able to go for hours and hours. I have not yet found a limit on how long I can go taking the ketones and the carbs together. And I know people have recommended carbs before, but try ketones with carbs, and dude, it's like endless amount of energy. All right, let's go hit it. All right, this trail is called Boo Boo, and I'll really be able to lay it over in the corners. Some pretty fun jumps on this one too. Yeah. Whoa. All right, man. There's something weird with the jumping. I can't quite put my finger on it. We're gonna head to another trail right now. But for the cornering, the head tube angle being super slack, long wheelbase, this is the best cornering bike so far. I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 5. But for the jumping, I think I figured it out. So the jumping feels kind of off. So I don't know if this frame is like really flexy, like super compliant, but it's like absorbing the lip. Like the Nukeproof was really peppy. Well, this bike is almost like muted. So going up lips of jumps, it kind of takes away the G-forces, and then you can't get like a good pop off of it. So for the jumping, I'm gonna give the jumping a 3.6, but the Nukeproof Scout was not that good at jumping either, and it still turned out to be a great bike. But we'll talk about the fit real quick. So the fit, I think I figured out what I like about the fit on bikes is when you're sitting on the seat, and instead of you sitting kind of straight up, some bikes make you do that. I like when the bike is kind of, makes you stretched out in a way, and it almost rotates your hips forward. Now this bike makes your hips rotate forward by having a long reach, and then just like the bottom bracket, everything just together is really nice. I'm gonna give the fit a 4.4 because it feels a tad too long for me. Whoa, I don't know where I'm going. All right, here goes the tech climb. Okay. Took a little bit more effort. It turned out pretty good. Whoa. On that tight stuff, I think the bike is just too long. Like the rear end gets hung up on things. Shit. So I'm gonna give the tech climb score. It's decent, but it's just too long, especially in the rear end. So I'm gonna give it a, sweat in my eye. I'm gonna give it a 3.9, but we're here at the chunk. All right, here it goes. Hopefully my brakes work good. Whoa. Oh, that last trail was not long enough to test out the compliance and the chunk. Oh yeah. Yeah, so this bike, this frame, I mean, is excellent at small bump compliance. The harder stuff, I don't know. I feel like, it's a little stiffer on the big stuff, and that's okay. It's still pretty compliant. So I'm gonna give the compliance score a 4.2. So let's hit this chunk coming up.
Okay, all right, man. Wow, that was actually pretty fun. Although now my hands are getting a little bit numb like I anticipated, and also my legs are burning a little bit after that chunk run. So I'm gonna give the chunk a 4.75, but I'm really curious what the overall score is gonna be. So let's head back to the shop and let's find out.
Wow, that was pretty fun, and I needed that after a few tough weeks. So thanks to everyone for the recommendation on this Rocky Mountain. I would definitely recommend this frame, and it had some really strong areas, but also some weak areas, but it was right up there with a Nukeproof Scout on how well it rode. But I'm not going to apologize for getting pissed at the price of the Complete with all of those bad parts. And Rocky Mountain should really consider selling this as a frame only, and dude, if it had sliding dropouts and I could suck in the rear wheel a little bit more, it would probably be the best hardtail ever. But that brings us to the overall score of 82 out of 100, a pretty close second to the Nukeproof Scout, and let's just say for one moment that the Rocky Mountain scored the same as the Scout in build quality and tubing shape, well, it would have scored 85 out of 100. So it's close, but not quite, but next week's bike might just win this whole thing. I had someone comment something pretty smart about the Rocky Mountain. They said something along the lines of, Rocky Mountain used to be a premier made in Canada brand, and they've always had high prices. Now that they've shifted their production overseas, they focus on volume, but they continue to have high prices. This is speculation. The commenter said that Rocky Mountain, with all of the parts that were just basically junk, was essentially a $1,200 frame. And I agree. The parts that came with the bike don't really have resale value. Well, the dropper is kind of decent. But that means this Rocky Mountain is basically the most expensive frame out of the bunch, and I can't recommend it. But if you could get a good deal on a used one, now we're talking. But if I had to choose between two big brand bikes, Trek and Rocky Mountain, I'd go with Rocky Mountain because it actually feels like they did some R&D on this frame and worked on the ride quality quite a bit. But we have 3 frames left to test, and they all come from smaller brands that all seem to be really high quality. Wow, episode 6. We're almost done with Hardtail Quest, and we have 3 more frames to test to find the best hardtail in the world. But today's frame might just win this whole entire competition, an RSD Middlechild, one of the most highly requested frames in the lineup, and the only frame we'll be testing with sliding dropouts. And I really like the stickers and the branding of this Middlechild. It's pretty fun, implying that it's like a wild frame or something. And I have a middle son named Eli, and he's a wild child. So I really hope this frame lives up to that. The build quality is actually super different from all the frames that we've tested so far for several different reasons. Like I mentioned, it has sliding dropouts, so I can adjust the chainstay length to how I want it. Also, the head tube is made to use an external cup at the bottom, plus there's external routing for all the cables. I would have liked to see an additional water bottle cage mount, but just holding this frame, seeing it in person, the build quality is just awesome, 4.9. Then the tubing shape is super interesting. Last episode with the Rocky Mountain, I was saying that the tubing is actually super narrow. Well, it's almost like someone told Rocky Mountain, hey dude, make your tubing a little bit wider. And Rocky Mountain said, no thanks, double it and give it to the next person. Then they sent that from Western Canada to RSD in the eastern part, and they said, all right, let's do it. So the frame shape actually reminds me of a BMX frame from the mid 2000s, Pro Concept. Beefy front triangle and a squared out rear triangle, and this thing is just girthy throughout. And I really like the chainstay with the brand stamped into the metal, but I can't help but to wonder if this thick tubing is going to make the frame too stiff and the bike will be kind of harsh while I'm riding it. So I do like the tubing shape, but with how tanky it looks here in the shop, I'm going to give it a 4.5, but let's check out the geometry. So the head tube angle is nice and slack at 64.5 degrees, and I've thoroughly enjoyed all of the slack head tubes on all the bikes so far, no complaints. The reach is on the longer side of things, 448 millimeters, but here's where I'm concerned, the stack. This frame has the lowest stack in the entire series, 619 millimeters, so I'm definitely going to be using my 35 millimeterized bars on this one, and we'll see how it rides. Another geo number that I'm super worried about is the high bottom bracket, 330 millimeters. By far the highest bottom bracket in the series, and I like a low bottom bracket. I also like a short rear end, and with the adjustable dropouts, I can control that between 415 and 430 millimeters. But with the tire clearance, I could only get it down to 422, and that makes the wheelbase 1197, right in the middle of all the frames. The last number that stood out to me was the seat post angle, which is 74 degrees. Now that is more laid back than most seat tubes, and the current mountain bike trend is to make the seat tube more straight up, but I think I like 74 degrees more because it's just more comfortable while pedaling. Plus, when a hardtail is sagged, the seat tube actually gets steeper by like 2 to 3 degrees, so this is more gonna be like 76 or 77 degrees. But with that, the bike is complete, and I mean, looking at it, I don't really know how I feel about how it looks. What do you guys think? So what do you guys think about how it looks? How would you score the looks on this bike? So when I was in the garage building it, after I was done, I really wasn't sure how I felt about it. And I even messaged my friend, I was like, I don't know if I really like the look of it. But out here on the trail with the wonderful lighting that we have today, this bike looks pretty sick, and I really like this blue with all the green background and everything. So I'm gonna give it a 4.5 on looks, but that means it's time to go ride. So two cool things, actually three cool things about today's ride is, well, this is like a day after that I just posted the Rocky Mountain video. I really thank you guys for all your feedback on using an action camera and then not really mattering so much. And some people even liked me just using an action camera because it's more authentic. And I kind of like it too because I get to give my live reaction and stuff like that. But hold on, let me warm up on some jumps. Oh, mud. Yeah, it is currently raining. Oh, mud puddle. Oh. Oh. Okay, maybe I shouldn't be on this trail. So the second cool thing about this ride is, I know I just talked to you all about the geometry, but that was future Evan, and I'm riding before I'm even reviewing the geometry. So the only thing that I know is about the chainstay being about like 423 millimeters, something like that. Everything else I have no clue about. So the fit, we'll see how spot on I am. Because a lot of people are accusing me of being biased when I'm riding the bike, knowing about the geometry, but I know that's not the case, but I'm just curious. I thought it'd be a fun test. Yeah, let's grind out some single track miles first. But yeah, I can definitely tell that the bars are much lower, and I actually feel kind of high up. Maybe the bottom bracket is higher, but either way, I think the seat tube is laid back a little bit more, but I feel like that kind of gives an optimal pedaling position, so pretty good. The wheelbase feels kind of moderate, right in the middle between all the bikes. And then the head tube angle, I can't really tell yet, but I don't feel like it's too extreme or anything like that. So I think the head tube is like 65-ish. But yeah, I think I guessed all the geometry numbers. You guys will know if I'm right or not. Ooh, I like that short rear end. Whoa. Yeah. Whoa. Oh, my glasses are all fogged up right now. Man, riding when it's wet is actually so fun. But this bike was single track. I can't really put my finger on it.
I'm not sure, man, these glasses are so fogged up. I'm not really sure how to score the single track because this bike kind of has a vibe to it, and it's just like different from the rest. It has characteristics that I'll describe in a little bit. It actually brings me back to my BMX days, but I'm gonna give this single track, it was average. It was pretty fun. I liked how snappy it was, and it's not so compliant though with the small bumps and everything. Like I could definitely feel it in my ankles, but I'm gonna give this single track a 4 out of 5. We're right about at the castle, so we can test out some flow and jumps if it's not too wet. I actually really like the climbing. Like there's something about a bike that climbs well. It's a bike where the bottom bracket height, the seat post angle, the reach, and the stack kind of all interface well together, and it creates a really great body position for climbing. And this bike, it's the best climber out of the bunch. I don't even know what a 5 out of 5 climber would feel like, but I'm gonna give this bike a 4.6 on climbing, because it's pretty good. But we're here at the jumps. All right, here's that new flow trail. Still don't know the name of it. Whoa. Oh. Wow. Yeah, there's just some bikes in this series. Remember, I'm using the same parts on every single bike. So my Pike Ultimate here is set up the same exact way for every single bike. There's some bikes that just, I can bottom out the fork way easier. So what I'm gonna do here, I don't know if you can see, I'm gonna raise the high speed compression. Let's try one click, and then let's hit the next flow trail called Catapult, I think it is. I don't know. Yeah, that's the one, Catapult. That means it's time for some flow. Yeah. Whoa. Definitely got washed out from some major downpour, I mean. Yeah, it's super flickable in the air. Yes. Yeah, I'm gonna give the flow I'll give it a 4.5. It's pretty good. I really like the fit on this bike, and it's because it feels like a BMX bike. That's the secret to this bike. It feels like a BMX bike. Like I can definitely tell the rear end is shorter, and the front end, it feels a lot longer. And also the bottom bracket feels high, just like a BMX bike would. Now, obviously that footage is a little bit distorted because the field of view is really wide. But then if we look at the shop, this bike is just super natural. And for that reason, I'm gonna give the fit a 4.8, but we still gotta do some jumps and cornering. All right, this one's called Medieval. Got some jumps and cornering. Yeah. Pretty good pop. So up for these corners, they are chewed up from the rain. Yeah, oh, this bike has some good pop to it. Wow. Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to give the cornering a score on these trails at least. Have to go to another area. Yeah. Forgot to give a score. Jumping was pretty good, although it wasn't as good as the Ragley Big, which was such an amazing jump bike. Yeah, this bike with its BMX vibes, like I said, it had a really good pop. So the frame kind of had some give up the lips, and then it sprang back, which is what you're looking for in a jump bike. The Rocky Mountain, it would have give up the lips, but it would just absorb all that away, so I was like casing everything. But this bike is still a great jumper, living up to its BMX roots. I'm gonna give the jumping a 4.5. But man, I'm just giving out a bunch of high scores lately. I think this is gonna beat the Nukeproof Scout. I don't know, we'll see. But yeah, let me head to a different area to test out some turns that's not all chewed up by the big rainstorm that we had. I gotta say, thank you guys so much for all the recommendations. I wouldn't have even been able to think about, like, name 8 different hardtails if it wasn't for you guys. And I know a lot of people requested the Orbea Laffy, the Specialized Fuse, Santa Cruz Chameleon. I just wasn't able to get my hands on any of those. I was really focused on the Chameleon, but that one is just super out of stock everywhere. And they might be releasing a new version soon. That's why they're all out of stock. Specialized, all out of stock. And then the Salsa Timberjack, it's like, I couldn't get my hands on any of those. So the final hardtail is not gonna be a Santa Cruz Chameleon. Sorry. It's gonna be a English brand, a British brand that you probably haven't even heard of, but I'm really excited based on the geometry numbers that one has. So that one could win the whole thing, but I don't know, this Middlechild, I think it's gonna be scoring like 89. That's my guess, but we'll find out. All right, this is it. One of my favorite trails called Leopard's Loop. I'm trying out horizon balancing, so we'll see if that looks cool. Bump jump, yeah. How's that horizon balancing looking? Whoa, front wheel slide. All right. Well, what'd you think about the horizon balancing? I just reviewed it myself. I'm not gonna be doing that again. It couldn't really tell how the corners were going. Maybe it's not used to like tight corners like that. But the bike, it corners all right. I mean, nothing too crazy, just kinda, it's just average. I wouldn't say it's anything like the Rocky Mountain with cornering. So I'll give the cornering I'll just give it a 4. But we are headed to test out the final areas, which are chunk and tech climbs, and what else? Oh, compliance. Let's hit it. Yeah, I'm still under the belief that you can't figure out a bike based on the geometry numbers. You just can't. I mean, I think it's like just magic. I don't know how engineers do it, or if they just kind of plop down some numbers and have people test it. But yeah, I think all the geometry numbers are synergy, magical, and this bike should be a great tech climber based on everything that I think that I like, but I'm not sure. Whoa. All right, let's hope this works. It's super wet. Whoa. Ah, pretty good. I wouldn't count it against it. Here goes another one. Yeah, on the Rocky Mountain, I got hung up right there. Here goes another one. Whoa, oh. So slippery. My confidence is shot. This is so slippery. I'm trying to get creative with these camera angles so you can see what's going on. Whoa, whoa, oh, made it. Nice. Well, for the tech climbs, obviously these rocks are a little bit wet right now, but I can still kind of get a sense of it. And I do like the short rear end, but it's nothing special. Like the Ragley Big and then even the Trek were really good because they're long, I think, at tech climbs. So I'm gonna give the tech climb a 3.9, but that means we're at the top and we're ready to hit some chunk. All right, here go the chunk runs. All right, hopefully it's not too wet. Oh, man, this trail's too short. I think I need more. Yeah. All right, here it comes. Here's the chunky part. Oh, it's wet. Oh, wow. That was pretty good. That was a little stiffer. I need more. All right, so this is the last trail. It has chunk and compliance. And this bike, I mean, this frame is not that great at small bump compliance and pretty stiff frame overall. Yeah, wow. Yeah, so for the compliance, Like I said, it's stiff, but it's actually, that's what makes the frame pretty good for jumping and other areas. And one thing I've noticed, whoa, slick. One thing I've noticed is I'm not getting forearm fatigue, arm pump. Yeah, no arm pump, no calf pump. So I'm gonna give the compliance 4.2. Oh yeah, here comes the chunk. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's pretty stiff, I don't know. I mean, it can handle the chunk just fine, but it's not super great at it. Like, it's just a stiff, burly frame. But for the chunk, I'm gonna give this bike I'm gonna give it a 4.2. It's still pretty fun. I would definitely take this, if this bike wins and it becomes my personal hardtail, I would definitely take it down chunk trails. It's pretty fun still. But yeah, 4.2. But man, I've been handing out some 4s and huge scores the whole day. And I'm curious what the overall score is gonna be. I think we might have a new leader. Let's go find out.
All right, let's just get straight into it because this is pretty interesting. I tallied up all the scores and the overall score of the RSD Middlechild came out to 87 out of 100, tied with the Nukeproof Scout, but there's no ties in Hardtail Quest. There can only be one winner. All right, so let me just hop on the computer here and see what the scores are down to the decimal point, and I still don't even know who the winner is here. So before I settle the tiebreaker, I will say one thing. I do think that I had more fun on the Nukeproof Scout, and that bike was better all around, but when I was writing this video and looking at the geometry numbers, charts, everything, all that, I stumbled across something super interesting about the RSD Middlechild. It looks like this frame is designed to be super versatile, and they have geometry numbers listed for mullet, 27.5 plus, even 26 by 2.8 inch wheels. So let me know if you want to see me build up this frame with some 26ers. But if I was gonna buy just one frame, even though the Nukeproof rode better, I'd still get the RSD because of the versatility. Plus, sliding dropouts, I could even go single speed with ease. And the tiebreaker comes down to, oh, the RSD Middlechild is the new leader, barely, dude. Oh my goodness, we have a new leader here, guys. So wow, the RSD was fun. And like I mentioned earlier, these small brands are way more accessible. So after the video posted, I actually chatted with the RSD and we talked about how I kind of felt that it wasn't that great on chunk. And they said that, well, it would be a lot better with 27.5 wheels. And other people commented that I should run the sliding dropouts all the way back and that would make the ride a lot better as well. So with all these options, I mean, I love it. I just love the versatility, but I did one better. I ordered some 26 by 2.8 inch wheels for the RSD. And I plan on what I'm gonna call the monster tail. So I definitely recommend the RSD, but we'll talk more about that in the epilogue. All right, it's time for the Canfield. Today, we're testing the Canfield Yelli Screamy, the OG aggressive hardtail. This comes right after the Nukeproof Scout was finally dethroned, and we have a new leader, the RSD Middlechild. I was just as surprised as you guys were that the RSD did so well because the geometry was just so different from what I thought I liked. And that's why we're doing these tests instead of sitting there pontificating at geometry charts. In a way, this is a quest for us to understand geometry and hopefully one day figure out the perfect geometry to build a custom frame. But today we have the 7th frame to build in the last 7 weeks. But first I gotta strip down the RSD, and the good news is I bought some 26-inch wheels for it, and I'm gonna build up a monster tail, and I'll do that video in like October. This is the Canfield Yelli Screamy, the OG aggressive hardtail, one of the first hardtails ever to have 29-inch wheels back in 2011. Canfield Bikes is a brand from Colorado that's been around since the 90s, but it's unclear where this frame is made. This Yelli Screamy has been tried in the fire with many revisions over the years, and you can tell it's a super refined frame. So this was actually the second frame that I bought in this series, and I actually bought it from a local bike shop. It was up on the wall for months, just kind of collecting dust. I guess someone had ordered it and had it built, but didn't like the color or something, I wonder why, and they took it apart without ever riding it. So because of that, I bought it for 700 bucks, but I just now saw while writing this video, they're on sale on the website for 600 bucks. Dang it, man. The build quality, it's top notch, and every frame on this hardtail quest, I've been requesting a second water bottle cage mount. Well, the Yelli Screamy, it has 3. So that means I can mount my CO2, an extra water bottle cage, or even a big frame bag for bike packing. I love it, man. Then the rear axle has a pinch bolt, which no other frame has, and that means you don't have to tighten the axle as much, leading to less pressure on the hub bearings and potentially a freer spinning rear wheel. So I'm really liking what I'm seeing here. I'm gonna give the build quality a 5 out of 5. But let's talk tubing shape, and let's address the elephant in the room, the curved top tube. So I showed this frame to a few friends and they laughed at me and said, that's a girl's bike. You know, given the curved top tube, they usually do that on ladies' bikes and the purple paint, obviously. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Is this a girl's bike? The website doesn't say it's female only, and I actually really don't mind the top tube. I like unique frames. Speaking of unique, check out this gusset. I've never seen one here before. Plus the down tube is a square tube, which is awesome, and the rear triangle tubing is triangular, and just every tube on this frame is hydroformed, so that's a 5 out of 5 on tubing shape for me. But let's talk about geometry, and there's 2 numbers that really stand out. First up is the head tube angle of 65.5 degrees, the steepest out of all the frames, but that's based on a 130 millimeter fork. Well, Canfield says this frame can use 120 to 140 millimeter fork. So with my 140 millimeter fork, it comes out to 65 degrees flat. Then the seat tube angle, and Canfield got pretty wild on this one, 77 degrees, by far the steepest seat tube angle out of all the frames in this quest. Last video, I kind of just recently figured out that I like 74 degree seat tube angles because it's a better pedaling position for grinding out the miles. So I really hope this Canfield doesn't ride like crap. This frame has a really short chainstay, which I like. But one thing I'm worried about is the wheelbase is the shortest out of all the bikes, 1185 millimeters, although that's pretty close to the Nukeproof Scout, so we'll see how that goes. Then the rest of the numbers are just kind of moderate, right in the middle of everything else. The reach got changed with the fork travel increase, and it's now 445 millimeters, just how I like it, kind of short. Then the stack is very moderate, 638 millimeters. Last is the bottom bracket height, right in the middle with 320 millimeters. But I really wonder how this frame is gonna ride with the extreme seat tube angle, a steeper head tube angle, and the shortest wheelbase. This could either be too extreme or extremely fun. So I think the purple turned out awesome, and I'm man enough to ride our purple bike. Plus, I don't even stop that long on the trails, long enough for people to judge me. I'm more of like a blur. So I can really care less what other people think, but I'm gonna take some points away for this bike, and it's because of this curved top tube. Now, if the curved top tube was for compliance, I'm all for that. But if it's not, it takes away space from the water bottle, and I had to run a side cage, a smaller water bottle. So I'm gonna take the tubing shape down to 4.7, but overall, I really like the looks, and I already got a compliment on it, so I'll give the looks a 4.8, and that means we have a new virtual leader, but spoiler alert, I already rode this bike once off camera, and it did not ride well. Right away when I got on the bike, it just felt weird, and I could really feel that steep seat tube angle. It was really uncomfortable. Almost made the bike feel too small for me. And steeper seat tube angles are becoming more of a trend because that means you're able to weight the front end more, and that helps on the really steep, punchy climbs. But this was so steep that it felt like there was no benefit to the punchy climbs. It was so uncomfortable that it's all I could think about, and I couldn't even feel the other geometry. So because of that, I'm gonna give the fit a 1 out of 5. But then I started to realize something. This frame was really stiff, and at higher speeds with chunk or any kind of bumps really, the bike would just get overwhelmed and almost like it had a speed limit. I feel bad for doing this, but it rode chunk like the Trek did, so I'm gonna give it a 1 out of 5 on that. But the realization came on the climbs. If I stopped thinking about the steep C-tube angle, this bike was just effortless at climbing. Probably the best climber out of all the frames so far in Hardtail Quest. It was so efficient and almost like I felt like my heart rate was lower and I had more energy while climbing. So I'm gonna give the climbing a 5 out of 5, but that's when I started thinking. I think this frame is actually an XC frame. Dang it, man, I just wasted 700 bucks. Despite that discovery, I finished my ride and I just stuck to the slow speed single track stuff because that's what this frame felt like it was good at. So I didn't get to test the flow trails or the jumping, so let's go hit it. Well, I am not warmed up at all. Let's hope this goes okay. Whoa. All right, not bad. Whoa, the seat is in like a really bad position and keeps getting in the way. Whoa, damn. This frame gets deflected so easily. Yeah, I'm gonna give the jumping a 3. I do not feel comfortable on this thing. All right, let's see how it does on this drop. Oh, kind of scary. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a really stiff frame. It almost feels like a rigid or something. But I'm gonna go to another area to see, maybe I can test out some flow and some corners. Let's see. Well, Thunderdome at Kohler was closed, so I can't test any flow trails at Kohler, so I made it over to Slaughter Pen, the other trail system. I should have stuck here the whole time, but I'm at one of my favorite trails called Leopard's Loop. Let's hit it. All right, here we go. Nose manual, yeah. Bump jump, yeah. Yeah, I like a shorter end, that's for sure. All right, corner's all right. Whoa. Yeah, the cornering's not bad. It maintains speed well because it's not a very flexy frame. So I'm gonna give the flow I'll give it a 4. Try to be fair to this bike. This next one is called Boo Boo. And there's 2 turns here I can really lay it over. See how it goes. Okay, not bad. So the turning kind of went how I expected it to after the first ride. There's like a little bit of understeer where I go to turn and the bike isn't turning. So I have to compensate by turning even harder, and it's just a kind of uncomfortable feeling. And maybe I could get used to that over time, but I mean, I've spent maybe 4 or 5 hours on this frame now and I still can't get used to it. So I'll give the cornering, I'll give it a 2.5, but I think I have an idea of what to do with this bike, and I've never done something like this before. I think since this bike feels like an XC bike, not just because of the C-tube angle, just everything, it feels like an XC bike. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go try to turn it into an XC bike. I'm gonna treat it like an XC bike, put some different parts on it, and we'll see how it rides.
Well, how's that for an XC bike? Only the OGs will remember that fork, the Fox 34 step cast, and then I got a longer stem on. I got narrower bars, just some generic ones that I got off the Ragley, but I cut them down to 740, the narrowest bars I've ever used on a mountain bike. And I'm thinking that this bike should rip. It actually looks a lot better. I forgot how cool that the gold stanchions look. Now I know why everybody wants those. But yeah, this bike, just riding it over from the parking lot to here, I think this is the way to set up this bike. So let's go find out. Yeah, man, this is the way to set up this frame. Man, this is awesome. Like, I'm getting the benefits of that steep C-tube angle now, and it feels great. I really like it. Well, notice one thing. I'm not sitting there saying, Canfield bikes suck, because that's just kind of a broad, foolish statement, and I don't say that about bike brands. Not every brand is gonna have a bike that feels great for everybody. And I'm not getting paid by Canfield to do this. I wish I was, but I'm doing this for you guys, the Saga Squad, to hopefully be satisfied with this review. And that's why I'm putting in the work. It's for you guys. So let's go see the single track, how it feels. Here we go. This is called Oscar's Loop. Oh, I really like that front bias now with this stem and bars. Yeah. Whoa. Wow. Yeah, this is trippy about the handling. I kind of like it. I might want to get a real XC bike or something. See how it does on this punchy climb. Yeah. Let me know if you've ridden an XC bike, if they're worth it. I was actually thinking about getting the Vitus Rapide Hardtail. It's kind of a budget XC hardtail. Well, single track was pretty fun. It was all right. I mean, probably every single frame in the lineup would feel better on single track with this kind of front end setup. So I'll give the single track, I mean, it wasn't particularly nimble, and it's definitely not that compliant. So I'll give the single track a 4 out of 5. And notice how some categories kind of overlap each other. So compliance kind of overlaps into single track, the small bump compliance. And it's just a really stiff bike. And remember, I have the most compliant parts you could possibly buy. I mean, I have bird spokes, I have carbon wheels with cush core in them, I have titanium cranks, I got 1-up bars. All those things are super compliant. So, I mean, imagine if you didn't have compliant parts. This bike would not be, it would be a very stiff bike. Almost, like I said earlier, like it almost feels like a rigid. So for the compliance, I'm gonna give it a 2. Yeah, so the only thing left to do is tech climbs, and that's headed back to the car. So let's do it. All right, here we go. This is hard way to the cafe. Whoa, shit, oh. Oh my goodness, dude. The one good thing about this bike for tech climbing or regular climbing is I don't ever have to let off the pedals. It is such a super efficient climber. Whoa, hold on. Yeah, it's super efficient and I never have to let off, so it kind of like monster trucks over everything, which is great. So I think I have an idea of what this bike is probably good at. And let me finish out this trail, I'll tell you. Oh, not bad. Let's see this next one. Yeah, this bike with the tech climbs, I don't feel like it's anything special. This is kind of average. I mean, I've definitely had some frames that were really good tech climbers, but this one, I'm gonna give it a
I'll just give it a 3 out of 5. All right, made it back to the car. So this bike, this Canfield Yelli Screamy, I think it would be a great bike for backpacking. I mean, it wasn't particularly good at XC either. So I think it would, because it's so efficient while pedaling. I mean, I could pedal all day on that bike and it just feels so effortless. So I bet you throw a bag on there, throw a rack. I don't know what bike packing is like. I bet that frame would be amazing for bike packing. I feel bad for scoring it like I did, but then again, it is what it is. This is my hardtail quest, my opinions on each and every frame. So let's go see what the total scores are. So it's a bummer that this frame didn't work out for me, and I hope I'll be able to sell it to recoup some money. For this lineup of frames I did for Hardtail Quest, I really did very minimal research, just enough to see that they were 29ers and could use a 140mm fork, but I really tried to avoid brand talking points or hear someone else's opinion on it. And I just now checked, and Canfield says this Yelli Screamy is an XC bike with an identity crisis. Just don't call it a short travel hardtail. I don't know, but let me know if you think I gave this frame a fair shot. So with everything, we have ourselves a new winner of last place, 59 out of 100. But next week, the final frame in Hardtail Quest, and it's a frame that you probably haven't heard of. Let's see if you can guess what it is. So I had a lot of people comment that the Canfield was, duh, it was an XC bike. Their website even said that. But you know, it's one of those things where I purposely didn't look at the website because I don't want to be shilling all their talking points. I mean, I saw that the frame can use a 29-inch and can use a 140mm fork. That's pretty much all I cared about. But I had someone say that my review of the Canfield convinced them to buy that frame, that it would have been perfect for them. So if you're looking for a bike packing bike, the Canfield Yelli Screamy is definitely a good contender. But we have one more frame to go. Let's see if I save the best for last. This frame is the final test of season 1 of Hardtail Quest. A frame straight from the UK, the Bird 029. And to be honest, I've never heard of this company before this quest, but thanks to a few commenters recommending this, I chose this frame over the Santa Cruz Chameleon, because just looking at the build quality, I think I'm in love. But there's an issue, the geometry. Even looking at the website is unknown in a few areas. I'll tell you more about that in a second. And I've broken a rule of Hardtail Quest and went with a size medium long based on the recommendation from the lads at Bird. So I'll have to take my own measurements on the geometry in a minute to see if I got the right size frame. But the build quality, top notch. And this has got to be the lightest frame in the Quest. I'm not sure, I haven't really been weighing frames. Actually, hold on, let me weigh a couple. Okay, so it's not technically the lightest, but man, the RSD Middlechild is a tank. But anyway, the welds just look cleaner, the cable guides are a bit different, and they've adopted a UDH. So with how good this frame is, I'm gonna give it a pass on not having a second water bottle cage mount and give it a 5 out of 5 on build quality. Then the tubing shape. And by the bottom bracket, there's this super tricked out CNC'd wishbone, and that's the most tricked out looking piece I've seen on any of these frames. And that's gonna give a lot of tire clearance. The rear dropouts are also CNC'd, although they look a little bit different from the website. Overall, with all the hydroform tubing and the cool gussets, I'm gonna give the tubing shape a 5 out of 5. But then it comes down to the geometry, and here's the problem. If you look at the website, they only have the sag number listed for the reach, and to me, that's kind of the main number that I look at when determining size. So we're gonna have to put together this bike and take our own measurements, and hopefully this medium long is the correct size. All right, so the frame is together and this thing feels massive. I feel so stretched out, but if I do stand up, it does feel normal. So we gotta test out some geometry, take some measurements and see what's going on here. Real quick, sag geometry means that the suspension is compressed with the rider's weight. On a hardtail, the whole frame will pivot forward, changing the geometry numbers. So it looks like the reach with my janky measurement setup is 450 millimeters, which is on the longer side, but if I went with Bird's standard medium, that shows a sagged reach of 437 millimeters, 23 millimeters less than this medium long, so I think this was the way to go. The stack is very tall, one of the tallest in this series, and the head tube angle is the slackest in the whole series, 63.4 degrees. It's funny, the more things that I measure and jot down on my spreadsheet, I think this Bird 029 is very similar to this Ragley Big Owl, and I really like this frame, but it did have some glaring issues. Just like the Ragley, it has a 435 millimeter chainstay, a bit long for my liking, but it has a low 305 millimeter bottom bracket, which I like, and a 1200 millimeter long wheelbase, very moderate. But then there's a number that I'm worried about, the virtual seat tube angle. 73.1 degrees, the most laid back seat post in the whole series. I think that a 74 degree seat tube angle is just perfect for pedaling, but any further back, and I don't know, man, maybe that's why it feels gigantic. I'm sitting further back and the bars feel just way out in front of me. I don't know, I'm about to swap some parts around or something. But before I go ride, since I've been swapping all my parts over 8 frames in the last 8 weeks, all of my bolts and hardware is kind of getting worn out, so I picked up some titanium bolts from Better Bolts. Not because I'm a weight weenie, because I like nice things. And hopefully these bolts will hold up a little bit better. Well, with that, the bike is complete, and man, I think I have the ultimate hardtail. Well, what do you guys think about how it looks? I'm just so happy to have a super dialed, like top of the line hardtail. Everything about this bike is so nice now, and the titanium bolts maybe saved like 20, 30 grams, but it's gonna make me happy looking at it. So overall, this raw aluminum is just awesome, man. And I'm gonna give this, I know I've been getting a lot of high scores in the looks category, but I really saved all the boutique, rare brands for last. So I'm gonna give the looks a 5 out of 5, but it seems like every time I've scored a bike high on looks, then it doesn't ride well. And just being out here, I can see that this seat tube is super slackened out. So I'm a little nervous about that. And this is my first time riding it, so let's go find out. All right, we are at Slaughter Pen today. Seems like the heat is finally dying down. See if we can get warmed up. Whoa, my grip is not tight enough. Wow, my grip just rotated. Yeah, so I actually did a few things to give this bike a fighting chance. The front end felt super big, so I put a shorter stem on, lower rise bar, and I actually scooted the seat back. Wow. Got some whiskey throttle there. All right, here we go again. My tires were folding up the lips before. Yeah, much better. Yeah, I actually cut down my bars to 760 finally. Feels much better. 760 is the way to go for hardtails, man. Yeah, one-hander. All right, let's start with some single track. Man, this
front wheel feels so far out in front, like I can't even reach the front. It is so slack. I mean, 63. When I first got on this frame, man, I was nervous. It felt just gigantic with a huge front end. But with a little bit of changes that I made, this bike actually fits really well. I mean, this is only the first couple minutes of riding this, so I'll give that a score later, but this is already looking to be going in the right direction. On these little punchy, really steep climbs, I can already start feeling that C-tube angle being really slack. I have to shift my weight forward, and that's gonna be deduction from some points, man. Yeah, I haven't rode in a week since the Canfield, and I just had no desire to ride that thing off camera, and then just kind of life got in the way. So I feel like my fitness is just a little bit off. Oh, it's so perfect right now. With the temperatures coming down, this is awesome. I can't wait for winter time. Yeah, oh, okay. Whoa. Wow. Oh, a little nervous front end there. See if I can do this. Whoa, what? Oh, this is so steep right here. Ah, nope. Well, okay, that may have been rider error. Well, it was rider error, but bike fit and feel is so important. And these tests are all subjective. There's no machine that I can hook my bike up to and it'll give me, feedback like, oh, this is a great tech climber. So if it doesn't feel right, I mean, your confidence gets zapped. And man, my confidence is kind of zapped on the tech climbs. I don't want to fall over backwards. I had someone comment when I gave a preview about this frame, and they said that this frame is one of the most stiffest frame in the world, but I don't see how it could be, being one of the lightest frames in the whole lineup. And I feel like it's doing pretty good on single track. It's not too harsh or anything. Yeah. For having such a slack head tube angle, it sure is nimble, man. Oh, buck. Check out these deer. Oh. Yeah, this frame is fast on the single track. I probably could have left the taller bar on here. It would have been fine. But then again, I'm like in full attack position. It's nice. Wow, I mean, that was a pretty nimble bike on single track. I think this bike was designed for single track in mind. Now, if I think back to the Nukeproof, which got a 5 out of 5 on single track, this Bird Zero is right up there with the Nukeproof. But there's a few things, like the Nukeproof was more compliant on the small bumps. This one is still handling small bumps very well, but it's a little bit stiffer. But I think because it's stiffer, it actually rolls much faster. And I felt like I was jamming on that single track. And some people might sacrifice stiffness for speed. I did like the Nukeproof a little bit more on the single track. And I'm gonna have to deduct points because single track has, switchbacks and punchy climbs. And with the seat post that far back, I did have to get off the saddle a lot more than I'm used to. So I'm gonna have to bring it down a notch. I mean, the Nukeproof was a 5 out of 5. So I'm gonna give the Bird Zero on single track, I'll give it a 4.7, but we still got a lot more to go. I don't know what it is about this frame. Maybe it's a slack head tube angle, but the balance point going up these climbs is so crazy. It is such a good, well-balanced bike, but the seat post is just too slack for me, man. But there's nothing I can do about the slack seat post angle. I've already done all I can do, bringing forward my seat, shortest stem. So I'm gonna have to give the climbing, I'm gonna have to bring it down to a 3.8, but still not bad. Maybe I'd get used to it after a while. All right, let's hit some flow trails.
Yeah. Wow, it's handling the bumps and the turns very well. That's crazy. Yeah. Oh. Whoa. Yeah, this is just like the Ragley, just a bit smaller. I like it. Whoa. Well, dude, that went pretty well. I'm pretty happy with that how it is, but since this is Hardtail Quest, I gotta score it based off the others. And the Ragley was a 5 out of 5 on flow. Just so fun, so flickable. And this bike was similar, but I feel like it wasn't as flickable in the air. And I honestly wish that the rear end was a little bit shorter. Based off those things, a little bit of deductions, I'm gonna give it a 4.6 on the flow, but we still gotta do jumping and cornering. All right, here we go. For some jumps and cornering. Yeah. Oh, all right. Yeah, this thing can handle the bumps in these corners so well. I'm surprised, dude. Yeah, I'll give the cornering, I'm gonna give it a 4.8, it's really good. Oh, it's so loose right here. Yeah. Well, dude, that jumping went amazing. I don't know what makes a frame a good jumper. I haven't quite put my finger on it yet. The Ragley and the RSD were great jumpers, and they had very low bottom brackets, as does this one. So I don't know if there's something to that. And then this frame is kind of stiff in a way where you can just kind of get some spring off the lip, and I really like that. It's really important for a jumper. I'm gonna give the jumping I'll give it a 4.5. It's pretty dang good. So I'm giving out a lot of high scores right now. This could actually be the new leader at the end of the day. But let's go find some tech climbs. This is a secret trail no one knows about. Definitely got to lean forward, but it's handling it well. All right, I did it. Whew. My heart rate is so peaked out right now. Man, I did that same tech climb on the Banshee, and both of these frames completed that. But man, this frame, I just had to work for it so hard, and the body position is just not optimal. So I'm about to take some points away. I'm gonna give the tech climb a 4, just because it still does well. I just had to be out of the saddle pretty much the whole time. But let's hit some chunk, man. All right, it's time for chunk. And then we can figure out the compliance score too. Here it goes. A little rowdy, not bad. Yeah. All right, here comes the next chunky section. Wow, not bad. When I went through there with the trek, I saw stars. Whoa. All right, last chunk trail is dragon scales. Now, I had some people comment that this frame was gonna be so stiff, but I'm not feeling it, dude. Like, this is just as compliant. Oh yeah, on the chunk as the Nukeproof Scout. Just not as compliant on the small stuff. Like, man, that just dances around that so easy. Yeah. Yeah, so I'll give the compliance
I'll give it a 4.4. Awesome, man. But here comes the chunk. Whoa. Yeah, I can attack with this bike, dude. Woo. Whoa. Yeah. Wow, this thing is so fast. Whoa. Yes. Well, my mind is like a little bit blown right now. I mean, that was so good at chunk, and I did not expect it to be, seeing how it's such a lightweight frame, and I was just attacking the crap out of that, dude. The Banshee was probably better at chunk, but barely. So I'm gonna give the chunk a 4.9, and the only score left to give is the fit. And I don't know, man, there's been some pretty high scores so far today. So let's go head back to the shop and find out.
Wow, I am still kind of blown away that this small brand that I've never even heard of before produced a bike this good. But let's talk about the fit. So at first I was terrified that this medium long felt too long. And after a few changes, it actually fits exactly how I want it to. Yeah, I'm kind of sprawled out, and I complained a lot about the seat post because, you know, it puts me further back. I feel kind of more sprawled out, but it actually reminds me of a good fitting road bike. So yeah, I'm more sprawled out, I'm leaning forward, but I'm not putting any pressure on my hands, and I can even take my hands off. I'm not falling forward. So I think this fits exactly how it should. And plus, I just feel so balanced on this frame. I've never felt that on any of the bikes in the whole series. Plus, this is the only frame where I actually feel like it's a 29er. It's hard to describe. So while I wish that the C-tube was like 1 degree steeper, it still fits very well. So I'm gonna give it a 4.7 on the fit. But that brings us to the final score, and the RSD is the current leader barely with an 86.73, and the Scout is a close second. Well, with all the high scores I was handing out today, the Bird 029 has a score of 90 out of 100, and we have ourselves a new leader, and this was the final episode. So this Bird Zero is the winner of Season 1 of Hardtail Quest. Thank you guys so much for coming along this quest with me, and I plan on condensing the full season into one video with some back-to-back testing with the Bird and the Nukeproof Scout, so stay tuned. So there you have it, the Bird 029 is the winner of Season 1 of Hardtail Quest. I've never even heard of Bird before until I was browsing frames to buy for the series, and I was just kind of going through Pink Bike, and I happened to see that someone was selling a yellow Bird out of Texas. But the plan when I made this series was always to save the best for last. The most popular hardtail by far, the Santa Cruz Chameleon, I couldn't get my hands on one. They're just out of stock everywhere, and I could have purchased a complete for $2,500, but that complete came with a SRAM SX group set, the lowest quality drivetrain from SRAM. So that would have been a huge waste of money, and the resale value would have been maybe $1,300. So losing out on $1,000 did not sound appealing to me. I reached out to Santa Cruz to see if they'd hook me up, and they just kind of gave me a generic response back. Thanks for being a fan of the brand. So I reached out to Bird, and they agreed to send me the frame. So as promised, I wanted to do a final heads-up test with the top few frames just to see if I missed out on anything. I felt like I was so transformed as a bike reviewer by the end of the series, and the Nukeproof Scout was the second frame that I tested, so I for sure wanted to retest that one to see if I missed anything. Actually, before the final head-to-head test that I'm doing, I rode the Nukeproof just like it was sent to me as a, in a stock form, and I gotta say, it felt kind of uninspired. And I think I might be spoiled with all my fancy parts like my Bird wheels that really soften up all the small bumps, and my really nice fork with some carbon bars that also soften the trail chatter. But the stock Nukeproof felt harsh, heavy, sluggish. So I made the decision to yet again frame swap. I took apart my Bird Zero and frame swapped one last time with the Nukeproof for one final ride with all of my parts. Well, hold on a second. You might be wondering, what about the RSD? The RSD finished ahead of the Nukeproof, so why not test that? Well, after talking with the brands and reading all the comments about it, I was getting the sense that the RSD was designed to use with 27.5-inch wheels. I mean, the Middlechild had a 330 millimeter tall bottom bracket. That's super high. So it makes me think that, yeah, it can use 29-inch wheels, but the smaller wheels would make the bottom bracket much lower. And like I said, after I rode the RSD, I still think that the Nukeproof rode better. And even looking back on the Nukeproof footage, kind of looking at the bike in my garage, it gave me warm, fuzzy feelings. Same with the Bird. I mean, those two bikes, just like thinking back on the rides, I just had such a blast. So I decided that I'm not gonna test the RSD with this head-to-head test, but instead, I'm gonna keep the RSD as my N+1 bike, meaning yet another bike that I own, because I really like the versatility. Like I said, I'm already gonna put some 26-inch wheels on it, but I'm on the quest to find the best 29-inch hardtail. So that's why I decided to do the final test, the Scout versus the Bird. Compared to the other day riding this bike in the stock form, man, this thing is so compliant, just like I remember. Like, it just absorbs all these small bumps, but that wasn't the case when it was stock. When it was stock, it felt like a harsh bike. So I don't know if that's because of my wheels, you know, the Bird wheels, cush core, soft tires. So most of us know about the law of diminishing returns, right? Say you take a bike and put a $600 mid-tier fork on it, you know, replace that stock coil fork that came with your bike. It's gonna feel awesome. It's gonna feel like amazing. The whole bike will be transformed. But if you replace that $600 fork with a $1,200 fork, you're not gonna get that double amount of quality that you would feel with the first $600 upgrade. But with the Nukeproof, every single high quality part I put on that bike made a huge difference. Almost like there was no ceiling to how good the Nukeproof could feel. But then, I started to notice something. This bike is definitely a lot smaller. Remember, I'm 5'9". I don't know what that is in centimeters, but I'm thinking that I might be this bike might be just a little bit too small for me. When I stand up, I'm way more over the front. I mean, it's fine for the single track, I'll say that. The single track is awesome. Going slow, technical things. But I'm thinking I might be more balanced on the Bird. After all the testing, I think that I found a 440 millimeter reach is just too small for me. And actually, going back to the hardtail that started this whole quest, the 2022 Ragley Big, that also had a 440 millimeter reach, and that had that small bike feeling when I stood up, just like the Nukeproof Scout. But I wanted to revisit areas that the Nukeproof was weak at, jumping and flow. It did feel a bit better than I remember, but I was taking it easy as this was the first downhill run that I had since putting it back together. But it gave me enough confidence that I decided to head back up and push it a little bit and maybe even try to beat my KOM. Well, I was a few seconds short on my KOM attempt, but that record from April still holds the top spot, so I really have nothing left to prove there. As I climbed back up, I couldn't help but feeling a little crammed and hunched over with my torso while sitting and pedaling. I criticized the bird for having a really laid back seat post, but the Nukeproof is just 1 degree steeper than the bird, 74 degrees, and I didn't notice that much of a difference. But the hunched over torso and feeling like, I don't know, the feeling of being crammed like that, I don't think is really good for breathing. And on a long ride, that would definitely take its toll. But I wanted to do one final run on the Nukeproof to reaffirm one of its strongest areas, the compliance. I still believe the compliance felt great, but I can't help but wonder if it was all my fancy parts doing all the grunt work. And after all, I did get some commenters saying that the Scout was a very harsh frame, and I kind of felt that it was harsh too in its stock form. But I can confirm that a Scout with bird spokes is awesome. A few days later, I reassembled my Bird Zero for its victory lap as the winner of Season 1 of Hardtail Quest. On my first drop-in, I just felt so at home and so happy on this bike. Well, until this happened. But I'm just really happy that I didn't test the Santa Cruz Chameleon and happened to discover this brand. My tires kind of have a little bit of a leak to them right now, and they folded up the lip. I pumped up my tires, maybe a little bit too much, but I really wanted to ride some flow trails on this bird today. This bike just fit me so well, and I'm glad we really spent time diving deep into all the frame's geometry. I made a spreadsheet with all the frame's geometry and all the scores and everything. I'll have that link in the description if you want to check that out for yourself. I'm 5'9", and this 450mm reach was just perfect. And a lot of people told me that this Hardtail Quest was a great segue into learning about geometry and building my own custom frame. But at the same time, I'm still kind of lost on geometry. And I wondered, was this Bird 029 the winner because just the geometry, or was it because something else? But during my final ride, I came to the realization. It just occurred to me, what makes the perfect hardtail? And I know I spent a lot of time on geometry, and yeah, geometry, having a perfectly fitting bike is so important, but it's more than just that. If I think back, the Rocky Mountain kind of had similar geometry to this, but this Bird Zero has such great construction, and it's just so well thought out, so compliant, so snappy, so poppy. So what makes the perfect hardtail is the geometry and the construction of the frame. I then set off on some single track and pretty much instantly regretted overinflating my tires, and now the trail felt pretty bumpy. And I know I said this frame is one of the most compliant, but man, hardtails are touchy when it comes to setting them up correctly. Everything matters so much in comparison to the full suspension. Tire pressure, tire choice. If one of these is off, a hardtail is not gonna perform and is not gonna be as fun. One big thing I complained about with the Bird is the laid back seat post. But you gotta remember, I tested the Bird right after the Canfield, and the Canfield had the most absurd seat post angles, 78 degrees, so straight up. So from 1 week going to the steepest and then going to the slackest, I felt that 5-degree difference. But going just 1 degree to the Nukeproof and then back, those two frames felt pretty similar with the seat post, especially with my seat scooted forward on the Bird. So the Bird just felt perfect. It felt balanced, and it had a really good body positioning. I felt stretched out in a way, not too much, but I just felt like my torso and everything was really just locked in. So, I mean, it was great, no complaints. But I made it to the top, and it was time for cease and desist. Yeah, whoa, so bumpy. The jumping, flow, cornering, all just as good as I remembered. No revisions there. And then I took it down a chunk trail, and the chunk score still stands as well. So with 100% confidence, I'd like to present to you the winner of Season 1 of Hardtail Quest, the Bird 029. If you made it this far in this epic video, thank you so much for being a part of the Saga Squad. I wouldn't have done this without you guys supporting me, motivating me, and special props if you don't care about hardtails or aren't even in the market to buy one. I think you should try a hardtail. Come on, just try one again. They're cheap. But moving forward, I'm actually working on getting back onto a full suspension and revisiting one of my old favorites. Stay tuned.